So my name is Roberto Canton. I'm a solution architect at Microsoft, and I support our global partner solutions area for the US, specifically Veeam. Veeam is one of our largest partners for Azure. So hopefully, a lot of you are already backing up and protecting your data into the Azure cloud, right? And today, what we're going to talk about is Azure VMware Solution, right? And how Veeam works seamlessly with Azure VMware Solution, because at the end of the day, Azure VMware Solution is just another VMware environment, just happens to be running inside of the Azure cloud. So let's get started. So what is AVS? You're going to hear me refer to it as AVS a lot, Azure VMware Solution. It's literally a VMware environment that runs inside of Azure, right? So just think of you setting up a data center inside of the Azure cloud with all of the virtualization software from VMware running on top of it. It's bare metal infrastructure that runs inside of the Azure cloud, and you can consume it as a service. So how does that apply with Veeam? So if you're already backing up things to Veeam, if you're already doing data protection to Veeam, with Veeam, if you're already doing disaster recovery solutions with Veeam, you can recover all your workloads in an Azure VMware Solution cluster, right? So think of it as that. It's a Microsoft service. It's a Microsoft Azure service. So you don't pay Microsoft. You don't pay VMware. I'm sorry. You deal with Microsoft. So if you're already an Azure customer, you can consume Azure VMware Solution just like any other Azure service that you consume today. All right? So when it comes to the migration part of things, right? So we, as customers, and we want to migrate to cloud, we either do one of these four things, right? And you probably have them embedded. Some of you may have it even tattooed in some arm somewhere, but rehost, refactor, re-architect, rebuild, right? So where Azure VMware Solution falls into place here is in the IaaS space, in the rehost, right? Because you're migrating from an existing data center into a service like AVS. Now, where does Veeam come into play with this? If you're already backing up all that data into Azure, it's already there. All you have to do is pick, the appropriate geographical region, the appropriate data center, the appropriate availability zone inside of Azure, where you want to recover all the data that you've been protecting with Veeam all this time. So that's what AVS is. And at the end of the day, pushing the button and migrating the VMs, migrating the data is the easy part, right? And you don't have to end there. You can continue protecting all of that data, protecting all of the virtual machines with Veeam. And then on top of that, if you need to refactor, re-architect any of those applications, you're already there. You're already inside of Azure. Because at the end of the day, if we ask 10 different people what re-architecting an application is, we're probably going to get 10 different answers. It may just be, hey, you know what? I'm going to take the database and I'm going to put it in a PaaS service in Azure, and that's all the transformation I'm going to do for that application. So, but you get to choose and pick whatever you do with your applications once they're there. And of course, you can continue protecting them with Veeam. So, with Azure VMware Solution, you have the capability of migrating and extending your on-premises workloads and your on-premises data centers into Azure. And you get that continuity of your workloads not going down necessarily. You also leverage existing VMware tools or existing backup tools like Veeam, right, that you're already consuming today, because Veeam is one of the backup solutions that we have verified for Azure VMware Solution. So Veeam already works with Azure VMware Solution. And then you can seamlessly modernize the applications over time with Azure. Obviously, we are the best cloud for running Windows and SQL Server. There's a lot of licensing benefits because it's Azure, so that you don't get charged for those Windows and SQL Server licenses as you migrate. So what kind of use cases is Azure VMware Solution good for? You see disaster recovery and business continuity. That plays very well with Veeam, right? So whether you already have the data inside of Azure or you're thinking about protecting the data into Azure, then disaster recovery and business continuity would make perfect sense in an AVS environment, including native Azure, right? So you don't necessarily have to be consuming Azure VMware Solution. You may be consuming both. Because if we go back 3 or 4 years ago, having this partnership that we have with VMware now would be unheard of, right? Back then, the conversation was, are you going to stay on VMware or are you going to move to Azure? Now it's an and conversation, right? Now we have the capability of moving into Azure with AVS and consuming Azure services, backup and the data and the recovery of the data. It also gives you the speed of and simplification of migration. So let's just say that you backed up all your VMs or your data into Azure Blob Storage with Veeam. Now you need to recover it. Maybe you have a disaster pending or you have a disaster coming. I live in Florida, so hurricanes are a part of my daily life. So we have a hurricane coming, we can recover all that data into Azure VMware Solution or Azure natively or both. Application modernization, development and testing, obviously another one, and data center expansion, reduction, or retirement. Now, some of you may be in the process of renewing hardware. And we all know, all the issues that we have getting hardware these days, right? Maybe you're running out of data center capacity because it's not like anything crazy like a pandemic is ever going to happen, right? So, all of a sudden you need all these extra capacity for your data center, for protecting the data center, or better yet, for recovering it. So those are some of the data, some of the use cases for Azure VMware Solution. And like I mentioned before, there's your on-prem environment on the left. There's the Azure Cloud, there's Azure VMware Solution. It comes pre-built, pre-configured, and pre-deployed with everything from ESXi, vCenter, NSX, vSAN, HCX. All of that can then, using the Azure Backbone Network, communicate with any Azure service that you may be consuming today, including any Azure service that you may be consuming with Veeam. So, some of the features that we have, like I mentioned earlier, native vSphere support, fully featured networking stack, vSphere management, vSAN and NSX, HCX Enterprise available to support migration, but you can also migrate with Veeam, right? So, for example, if you declare a disaster and you recover your entire environment into a service like AVS, just never fail back. And you, in essence, have migrated all your data and all your environment directly into the cloud. It's got a tight integration with Azure from a management and governance perspective, from a security perspective, low latency to all of the connectivity into the Azure services. You can leverage the entire Azure ecosystem, which Veeam is a part of, and that's why I'm here. It's a single point of support, so you basically call Microsoft in case you have any issues with the service. And from a high-performance cloud infrastructure, we have optimized elastic infrastructure. We have automated self-service and provisioning, so you can do all this by yourselves. Dedicated, isolated bare metal infrastructure. This is not nested virtualization, so we're not doing some sort of magic, right? Where we're nesting vSphere on top of something that we're running inside of Azure. That's not what we do. This is bare metal infrastructure dedicated to one single customer, that single customer being you. Redundancy and placement control and security and encryption is all built into the platform. This is our unit of consumption, also a unit of measurement. So for example, if you have 1,000 virtual machines on-prem, you want to know how much Azure VMware solution you need. These are the three different types of hosts that we have today. AV36, I'm not going to go into all the details here, but this is just an FYI. We charge you by the node. So however many virtual machines you can fit in each of these nodes, you're going to pay the same amount of money. If you're running one VM on top of the node, you're running 1,000 VMs on top of the node. If you can fit them, it's the same amount of money. So obviously, the more VMs you can put inside of the node, the less your per VM cost is going to be. And we just announced the new AV36 on some of the regions, as well as the AV52 SKUs. This is a software that comes included as part of the service. So everything that you see on the left-hand side comes as part of what you pay Microsoft for Azure VMware solution. On the right-hand side is additional VMware software. So if you want to consume any of that additional VMware software, just talk to your friendly neighborhood VMware rep, get licenses for those, and you're good to go. You can bring them into a service like Azure VMware Solution. And like I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest advantages of the service over the other VMware-powered services that are in the different hyperscalers is the fact that because it's Azure, it is an Azure service, you get the Azure Hybrid benefit, which allows you to bring your Windows and SQL Server licenses with software assurance directly into Azure at no additional cost. The other advantage is you get free extended security updates for your 2008 workloads. 2012 is now part of this list as well. So if you're still running 2012 workloads or 2008 workloads and you want additional security updates from Microsoft, you've got to pay an additional license for that. But if you move those into Azure, including AVS, those are at no extra cost. Like I mentioned before, it's a service, it's an Azure service, so therefore it's owned by Microsoft, owned and operated by Microsoft. So if you have a problem with it, you know, you can't recover a backup, you can't reach the blob storage, you can't power on a VM, you call Microsoft, you don't call VMware. And we're not going to throw the hot potato back at you. We're just going to keep owning it, involve VMware where necessary, but it's a Microsoft-owned service. So, 3 key takeaways. AVS is Azure. So it's just another Azure service. That's very important to know. You can run VMware the best in Azure, in my opinion, not just because I work for Microsoft, right? But it's the most comprehensive cloud service out there. And it's now generally available. It's sold and supported by Microsoft. And the best thing is, you know, if you're already a backup and replication customer, Veeam customer, then you can still continue to use, you know, and leverage all of your licensing that you have with Veeam directly into the Azure cloud, including Azure VMware solution. So jointly with Veeam, Microsoft has created, you know, not just a Azure VMware solution for VMware Power workloads, but also for Azure native workloads. So you can use the same licenses that you run on-prem today directly into this service as well as into Azure, right? So Azure VMware solution plus Veeam, you can create the operational consistency that you're used to on-prem today. You can have fast and flexible recovery. You can have the ARC and workload migration as well. And we're working very tightly with the Veeam team as well to get more integration into the service as well. So you may see some additional announcements in the very near future. I'm not at freedom to talk about it yet, but there are still more things to come. So this is an example architecture of what you would use Veeam for with AVS. You see AVS over on the left-hand side. You see Azure natively. You have your Azure VNets. For those that don't know what a VNet is, it's just a network construct inside of Azure, right? And then you got the backup repository VMs that are running as a Linux VM inside of Azure natively, backing all of the data into the Azure Blob Storage. And then if you need to recover it, there's something called ExpressRoute Global Reach inside of Azure that basically is a circuit that connects your Azure VMware solution with your native services, where your Veeam backup manager would be, right? So you can already use this. If you're doing it from on-premises into Azure, forget about AVS, you can do the replication jobs directly into the Microsoft Windows VMs inside of Azure VMware solution as well, right? So you can replicate anything that you have on-prem directly into an AVS VM automatically as well. The other thing that you can also do is you've got the on-premises data center. As you can see in this picture, I don't even have AVS, Azure VMware solution, anywhere there. You're just backing up or replicating data directly into an Azure region, Azure Blob Storage. Then you can decide whether it's at a moment of disaster or at a moment of migration or whenever you want to recover those workloads either into native Azure services or into Azure VMware solution as well. All right? And I think that is the end. So thank you very much.